even if you eat right, exercise right, but if your body is under stress, if your body is anxious, and you are constantly guilty about what you are eating, your body will still not give you the right support because the underlying emotion itself is that of fear or guilt or anxiety.
So, why do many wellness plans still fail even when people are motivated or sincere about it?
The failure happens because it is looked at as another burden or another task that I need to do alongside my life.
A lot of young adults face problem of hair fall, hair thinning, and premature graying.
A combination of 4 to 5 factors that together play a role. One, lack of sleep. Second, stress. Third, nutritional deficiencies. Today, majority of people either overdo on protein or underdo on protein without proper clarity.
If you have to rate sleep,
Yes.
exercise,
Yes.
and nutrition,
Yeah.
what would you keep first? Joining us today is Snehal Naik, founder of Vigruti, okay, where wellness is designed for real life. She is a certified nutritionist, a yoga coach, and a PhD scholar in holistic wellness. Welcome, Snehal. Welcome to Beyond. Welcome to Beyond Spotlight with Chaitanya. How are you doing?
Doing good.
Thank you. So, to start off with, Snehal, what most people think associate wellness with is like strict diet, more exercise,
Yes,
and being more disciplined.
absolutely.
From your experience, what wellness actually is?
Thank you so much for asking this. And I truly believe in today's times, most people don't fail when it comes to wellness because they lack motivation. I truly believe what is failing is designing life around wellness. So, for majority people, as you rightly said, wellness or achieving wellness goals comes to eating, and again, there is a fear that is associated with eating because food is largely moralized. It is either good or bad or clean or dirty. And people have anxiety and fear even when they want to make choices as regards what do I eat. And I see so many people eating right, still feeling bloated, tired, or not up to the mark. Now, what we need to understand here is even if you eat right, exercise right, but if your body is under stress, if your body is anxious, and you are constantly guilty about what you are eating or making choices surrounding food with unclear emotions, the body will always remain in a stress response. And this is where, even if you eat right, exercise right, your body will still not give you the right support because the underlying emotion itself is that of fear or guilt or anxiety. So, what I believe how wellness can become realistic or sustainable today is first working on one's emotions and understanding that no food technically is good or bad, and every food eaten in moderation does no harm to the body. That's one thing. Second thing, rest is highly underestimated. So, people are just working in high alert and high stress all the time, trying to achieve every goal or every aspect of life. And ordinary things, like night sleep or getting adequate rest, is often underestimated. So, focusing on rest in an unapologetic manner really works because it helps to ground and regulate your nervous system. So, if that's attained, or if your nervous system is truly grounded, you will make wise choices when it comes to simple foods, maintaining a consistent routine, and there is no need to push hard beyond a certain point.
Okay. But you talked about motivation. Okay.
Right.
So, why do many wellness plans still fail even when people are motivated or sincere about it?
I think the failure happens because it is looked at as another burden or another task that I need to do alongside my life. Okay. Unfortunately, today a lot of wellness programs sell courses which work like short fixes. So, for example, there's 7 day gut reset or 21 days gut reset program, or lose 4 kgs in 30 days. I'm not saying that these programs are bad or one should demonize them, but what we need to understand is while any program might be a starting point, whatever goes on in your life, which is your work, your stress, your emotions, plus maybe a lot of people today under sleep. Sleep is highly deprioritized these days. So these things don't change when you embark on any program, or when you embark or decide that these are aspects where I want to bring a healthy choice point in my life. Also, your body doesn't understand programs, it only understands patterns. So, what we need to realize is even if I'm a highly motivated individual, in the background, in the hindsight, if I'm not prioritizing my sleep, I'm not prioritizing how grounded I'm feeling at an emotional level, but externally, I'm just looking at a wellness program to change my life or to offer me a fix, that's not going to happen. And this is where the motivation fails, because the motivation to do something is seen as one more task that I need to fix or bring in my already loaded day, instead of building my life around the wellness choices that I am doing. So, this is where I feel motivation doesn't last long.
You have been emphasizing a lot over sleep. Okay.
Right.
In today's day and age, people like the sleep hours. Okay.
Yes.
Whatever time people sleep, they don't complete even 8 hours.
Absolutely.
So how does this impact an human body?
Yeah. First, I believe that not everyone requires 8 hours of sleep. Okay. Realistically, even 6 to 7 hours of sleep work. But for that, I believe making small changes like sleeping 2 hours prior to midnight. So, a lot of people today I know don't sleep before 1:32, or a lot of people do not sleep before 12:30. Like the earliest, all the clients also that come to me, when I ask them about their sleep timings, it always is after 12 o'clock. But there is a lot of research which shows that the quality of sleep we get before midnight, that sleep acts as restorative sleep. So when we talk about internal organs or internal system being repaired or rejuvenated, which is our skin, our digestive health, all of that technically happens in the sleep we get before midnight. Also, today a lot of people face premature graying, and they highly rely, like they feel only fixing my nutrition habits or fixing my external care will help me to rid premature graying. It's not so. Again, it is lack of sleep, because the sleep we get before midnight, the melanin levels, the melanin repair actually happens during that time. So if you are sleeping after 12 or after midnight, please remember the real repair or the real wear and tear that your body undergoes during sleep doesn't happen. And as you said, what happens when we do not get 8 hours of sleep? Obviously, I think the focus window, the attention span is what actively declines. You tend to feel overstimulated, overwhelmed, even when the stimuli are not that great around you. You also might observe you tend to snap or overreact impulsively. And a lot of times we feel as adults, why are we doing this? But we don't realize it is actually all the backlog of sleep deprivation that is impacting my emotional anchor or my emotional responses during the day. So, I would say if you're someone who's functioning on 4 hours or 5 hours of sleep or even less than that, high time that you must prioritize at least 6 to 7 hours of sleep, and if not around 9:30, 10, at least 11:30 should be your realistic sleep window.
What hampers sleep?
First and foremost, I think the blue light. Okay, all of us are hooked onto gadgets the entire day, including our mobile phones, the light that emits from laptop, and majority people have a habit of scrolling through phone when they lie down on the bed. Lights are off, but the screen is on. Now, what happens is the hormone dopamine that the brain secretes when you watch screens in dark, it fools your brain into thinking that it's daytime. So, the longer you scroll your phone after lying down, the longer it's going to take for your brain and your nervous system to actually relax and enter the sleep mode. So, one thumb rule is no using gadgets or no scrolling phones 30 minutes before bedtime. So, you can keep your phone by your side, but I think doing simple practices like 2 minutes of deep breathing with your eyes closed, or just maybe doing a gratitude rewind of what all good things have happened during the day with your eyes closed. Trust me, you will not realize how you fall asleep in 2 to 3 minutes if these simple habits are integrated instead of mindlessly scrolling Instagram or Reels while you're on the bed.
That's a very good point you've mentioned
Thank you.
about probably gratitude,
Yes.
like just keeping your screen, like phone away for at least 30 minutes prior.
Yes.
Okay.
Realistic.
Yeah.
Because although theoretically we see articles which say no using screens 1 hour or 2 hours before bed, I think in a competitive world that doesn't happen. So instead of setting unrealistic goals, we can at least realistically decide that okay, if not 1 or 2 hours, at least 30 minutes before, I will not watch screens and keep my phone aside, and instead try to do some holistic practice like this. Another very good suggestion that helps is even 10 minutes prior to your sleep, if you keep your phone aside, just take a little water, warm water in a bucket, add a tablespoon of salt, and dip your feet. So, what this does is all the energy that you have accumulated throughout the day through your work, interacting with people, all of that energy is basically getting released via salt, because salt is known to be an excellent absorber of whatever is unwanted and you are carrying in your body, mind, and emotions throughout the day. So, when you do this final release activity just before sleeping, this again works as a very good anchor to make you fall into deep sleep in an effortless manner.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you have to rate sleep,
Yes.
exercise,
Yes.
and nutrition,
Yeah.
what would you keep first?
I believe sleep.
Okay. Then,
Yes. Because if you don't sleep adequately well, you're not well rested, you are not going to feel up to the mark to eat right and even exercise. So if your body is sluggish, if you're feeling lethargic, which happens when you're not rested well, you will procrastinate exercising, and to a large extent when it comes to making healthy choices, it doesn't happen because your body relies on quick energy fix, which comes largely through unhealthy nutrition.
so according to you, what is the biggest misunderstanding people have which keeps them stuck in the cycle of, say, starting and quitting?
So I believe that a lot of people think that once I start, I have to continue on that path no matter what. Okay, now what happens? Realistically, you might take a break. So for example, you start with a nutrition plan, or you start with an exercise goal that, let's say, every day I have to go for 30 minutes of outdoor walk. You do it successfully for 4 or 5 days, then something happens, either something in your environment, or you fall sick, or maybe some emergency, and 1 2 days break comes, and then there's a choice point of whether you want to continue or whether you want to give up. And this is where I believe most people give up, thinking that 2 दिन का break आ गया, then how can I do it, and let me just not do it. Also, I see this in a lot of clients when it comes to taking supplements. So supplements, for example, multivitamin or calcium or D3, I'm taking it every day for 10 days, then there comes a break, and then shoot gaya, I'm not able to restart. But what we need to realize, even if there's a break for 1 or 2 days, you again restart. You tell yourself that it's okay, I needn't be hard on myself. Yes, there were some limitations that came in, but I'm willing to restart the journey. So I think being hard in your mind, where you have an unrealistic expectation that once you start, the process has to be non-stop, is where people fail. So even if you fail, take a pause, breathe, and you can re-begin where you stopped in 2 or 3 days time. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't restart.
Does that hamper the progress?
I don't think so. It might hamper progress by a few grams. So, suppose you're looking at something like weight loss. Okay, realistically, if you follow a sustainable meal plan and cardio based activity for 30 minutes a day, you can easily lose up to 4 kgs in a month's time. Okay, now suppose you take a break for 2 or 3 days. You are, let's say, going out, eating a meal at a restaurant, or there's a party, you end up eating more than your recommended portion, and you check your weight and see that you've gained half a kilo. Now, this is something that has happened in a 2 days period. You come back on track, you can lose that half kg in another 2 days. But what happens if you stop there and you don't do things further? What happens is, again the metabolism gets confused, and instead of your half kg gain that has happened in 2 days, you will gain 2 or 3 kgs in the next 10 or 20 days again. So this is where I feel a small deviation should not deter you from not continuing or not restarting where you have stopped. Yeah.
So there's a saying that uh, healthy diets or healthy diet plans create more guilt or
Yeah.
stress
Yes.
among people rather than health.
Absolutely. This is true. And this is where I believe that Yog Vritti differs, because what I do, I truly believe that each person has their own staple food patterns that they follow from childhood. As an adult, when you decide to work on your health goals, whether it is weight loss, addressing your hormonal health, postpartum, prenatal, whatever it is, I believe that one-on-one approach makes a lot of difference, because what your body is used to eating since the childhood, we work accordingly on the same pattern. Also, if you are a vegetarian, I being a nutritionist, if I impose non-vegetarian food options on you, it is not going to be sustainable for you to follow them, or vice versa. If I am an vegetarian or a non-vegetarian person, and I if a nutritionist compels that you need to only follow a naturopath plan where these eggs or non-vegetarian options are not supposed to be consumed, I will not be comfortable, and beyond a point I will give up. I will not follow, because habits, like the brain believes in familiarity. So what my brain or my mind is familiar with, it will keep going back to that. And this is where healthy diets fail, because they look at things in a generalized manner. So while I consult with clients, I understand their entire dietary regime from morning to night, their staple food patterns, whether the pattern they are following is vegetarian, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, and accordingly options are designed. And it's my observation since the last 6 years that you can technically eat everything in a balanced way and still hit your health goals. So it doesn't have to be typically a soup salad diet or a low calorie diet or just a healthy diet that does not balance the elements. It doesn't work like that. So you can certainly eat everything and still hit your health goals without feeling guilty. So there's a balance of taste plus health when I deal and I coach clients for their health goals.
So, about health, if you talk about health, do hormones and stress play a role when it comes to weight management?
Of course, yes. If you are someone who is constantly stressed, who is constantly overwhelmed, or constantly on high alert, your nervous system learns to survive more than heal you. Okay. So, what happens if you are someone who is constantly stressed? You might eat right, you might exercise right, but because the hormone cortisol, which stress causes, is on a high level in your body, the response that your body gives you will obviously not be as we are expecting it to be like. And this is where clients feel demotivated, thinking that even when I'm doing everything right, why am I still not losing weight? Your body is not losing weight because it is looking like your body is actually helping you to survive the stress instead of fundamentally healing you. So, the moment, see, external stressors are bound to be there. We can't say that external triggers or external stress can't be there or you need to overcome stress. That's again an extreme or an unrealistic way of putting it up. Yes, stress is an inevitable part, but the point is how I'm going to work to regulate my nervous system to handle the stress in an effective manner so that my body relaxes even when there are 10 things that I have to do, or even when I have a taxing to do list. I'm not frantic or I'm not anxious. I can do the same 10 things in a calm and grounded manner. And this is where, when I eat, when I exercise, my body will support me instead of just holding my body to survive the stress.
You talk about external stress over here.
Yeah.
Are there any ways you can still reduce external stress?
Yes, yes, I do believe. And I think, again, when it comes to working on reducing external stress, more than recommending methods like meditation or positive thinking, which I think are pretty random, arbitrary, and not everyone can do it. So, meditation, like a lot of people talk about it, but it's not easy to do on a daily basis because again the mind is like a monkey, it keeps wandering, and to take dedicated time out for meditation again in real life is something that's not possible. So one thing that helps me, I feel, to handle stress is using multiple journals. Okay, now what you can do, you can keep around 2 to 3 small journals. I'm not talking about fat diaries or fat journals, but what you can realistically do when you start your day, you keep one journal as an hourly planner. Okay, so if you're someone who starts your day at 6 or 7, just make pointers like 6 to 7. What am I going to do? So, suppose it's brush, having warm water, and maybe sitting in 5 minutes of silence, preparing breakfast. Then 7 to 8, what are you going to do? Maybe eat my breakfast, have a cup of coffee, and go for a walk for 10-15 minutes, or maybe 5 minutes of deep breathing. If you're someone who has other commitments, like let's say for example, I'm a mom of two young kids and my days are largely unpredictable. What happens a lot of times is I have a particular plan in mind that I want to do in the morning from 6 to 7. But turns out my younger one has woken up. Now I know I will not be able to do that. So keep the timeline flexible. And I believe what helps is making time zones. Like instead of rigid hourly plans. So let's say if I have decided that I will exercise for 15 minutes between 6 to 7 and it doesn't work. My younger one has woken up. I shuffle my priorities. So if exercise is something I have scheduled at 9 o'clock, I will reverse it either to 6, or if I have kept it at 6, I will switch it to 9. So this one activity helps to manage stress because you have your day in control when you are planning your day in an hourly manner. This planner ideally I think needs to be there with you all the time, because whatever last moment changes or schedules come in, you it helps, you can just pen and execute it accordingly and plan your day hour by hour instead of just letting the day pass. I think this helps a lot because that keeps you in control. You know what you have to do each hour. Even if rest or free time is there, you are not overloaded because you know exactly I will rest for this time and then I have to move to this task. A second journal that can help you is to rewire your mind or brain. A lot of times, the conditioning and the beliefs we have are rooted in our childhood, and they also come from our parents or from other people with whom we associate. So let's say for example that I share with you that tomorrow, I'm going for a skiing and this is a new experience, and you tell me, please be careful, I tried to ski once, but you know what, I fell and it was horrible. Now what happens, hearing your experience, my mind goes into a high alert instead of creating an exception that although Chaitanya has gone for skiing and he has had that experience, it's not necessary that I will face the same thing. But our mind again reels on familiar beliefs and familiar conditioning. So, what you do is a second journal can be used for rewiring the mind. So, instead of saying, like, even if my internal narrative is I am feeling overwhelmed, I instead write one line. I choose to believe that I am in control of my day, and I choose to believe that today is an extremely productive day. So, whatever negative beliefs pop in your mind, you counter them with I choose to believe, or I know that today will be, instead of the negative beliefs. So, even if again you needn't do a huge list, even I would say challenging 3 to 4 of your such negative potent beliefs that you're starting your day off with. If you work on rewiring your mind, you will see how wonderfully your day goes. So I think these small habits and micro changes impact a lot in terms of handling external stress in an effective manner.
So these habits, the small habits, actually have a sustainable impact on your health over a
Yes.
period of time. But
They do. Also, in case you are not able to journal, another one very, very good and effective technique which is sustainable is when you realize you are in your bed, it's morning and you have woken up. I think unconsciously, a lot of us simply reach out to our phones to check if there are any notifications, or we get up and just get started with the day. Instead of doing this, a an extremely sustainable and a doable habit is the moment you realize you've opened your eyes, there itself, close your eyes and take 5 deep breaths. So, this is, I think, doable and everyone can do. I don't think there's any excuse here, where, oh, but this is so difficult. Oh, but I can't do it. You can. It's all about being aware. Close your eyes, take 5 deep breaths, set one intention in your mind for how you want your day to be like, or set an intention for your own energy that I choose to be grounded, regulated, and balanced before I'm getting started for my day ahead. So, this one micro habit again is sustainable and doable just the way we brush our teeth without fail in the morning. Yeah.
so, does this have an impact over a period of time?
Yes, I do believe it has. I would give my own personal experience of how it's helped me. As I said, with two young kids and multitasking so much, I found myself at a juncture where externally everything was fine, monetarily, health wise, managing time. But what I found was I used to be extremely irritable, angry, short tempered, keep yelling on my children throughout the day. And to be honest, I don't have any major household support at home because my in-laws are not with me. My parents are a bit away. So mornings typically are very hectic where the entire load is on my shoulders. And I used to carry a lot of guilt knowing that I have everything. Still, my internal radar or my internal balance is something that's not in control. And even the kids were reflecting it back. So unknowingly, they were also irritated, cranky, fussing when it came to eating food in a calm manner. So when I started doing this regularly, I saw the difference in 5 days. Okay, I literally saw the difference in 5 days where my kids also calmed down. I felt regulated, I felt calm, and I think I saw a massive energy shift in terms of how I was doing things. So maybe the act was the same, that I'm feeding them the food, but I felt I was way more involved, calmer, and in the process instead of just finishing ki, chalo, I have to do this and get away with it. So this is the shift that I observed, and I believe this shift then reflects in everything else I do. It's not just for the kids, whether I'm going for a walk, whether I'm exercising, whether I'm responding to clients, the focus, concentration is 100% to each task without getting deviated or restlessness or anxiety coming in the picture.
I love the way this conversation has already started. It's been so insightful.
Thank you.
Like, yes. So now coming to a very important topic. Okay. So what we observe these days is a lot of young adults face problems of hair fall, hair thinning,
Yes.
and premature graying.
Right.
Why does this happen?
I believe that any aspect, including hair fall, is multifactorial. Okay. And any individual's entire lifestyle plays a role in it. So one can't really blame genetics alone or poor nutrition alone or lack of external care alone. Typically, when it comes to hair thinning, premature graying, or hair fall in young adults, as I said, it's a combination of 4 to 5 factors that together play a role. One, lack of sleep. Second, stress. Third, nutritional deficiencies. I'm not saying that everyone eats incorrectly. They might be eating correctly, but there are long, erratic gaps between meals. And again, when it comes to meals, today, majority of people either overdo on protein or underdo on protein without proper clarity of, in all honesty, you need a balance. So maximum people demonize carbs thinking that I shouldn't be eating carbs at all. But when it comes to hair, I truly believe that all three macros play an equally important role. So you need good fat, you need a balanced amount of carbs, and you need protein in the right balance to help your hair. Also, eating frequently. So, what happens when you don't eat frequently and when there are large gaps between meals? Technically, the acid level of the body spikes up. And whether someone has overt heartburn or overt acidity or not, the body tries to maintain alkaline level by leaching on calcium. So, what happens is, because you're not eating for a long period of time and your body to maintain the alkaline level is leaching on calcium, there is calcium deficiency, D3 levels drop. Also, typically in India, as I see it, a lot of people are misled like they have this misconception towards supplements, thinking that supplements are medicines, and they don't want to take supplements. But the fact is, if we look at it, supplements are nothing but the same nutrient in a concentrated form. And today we do not get everything from the food we eat alone. This is a fact. So, you need a right balance of nutrition, eating correctly, frequently, with balance of the right macros. Definitely incorporating right set of supplements if you want healthy hair, because unfortunately, like olden times, neither do we have a complete purity of food, nor do we have a complete purity of the environment around us, nor the lifestyle. So to strike a balance, when you complement your food with supplements, also understand whether your external hair care is optimal or not. By this, I don't mean you need any high end or expensive products. But as I see it, a lot of people who come to me do not wash their hair beyond 2 days a week, or they do not dry their hair properly, demonizing hair dryers, thinking that hair dryer is necessarily going to harm my hair. So what happens when your scalp fundamentally is unclean? It becomes a breeding ground for fungus, bacteria, dandruff, seborrheic dermatitis. So making corrections on these basic lines, that is, what's the right frequency to wash hair in a weekly basis, what shampoo you need to use. Secondly, if someone wants to work on their hair texture, understanding that conditioners are not required. This is, I think, one of the biggest myth that today people are still not completely aware of. Okay, they use conditioners believing it's going to work on their hair texture, which doesn't happen. Looking at hair fall or hair thinning, the comb and the brush, which is used to comb hair, people don't clean the bristles of the comb or brush using a liquid soap and water. They hardly do it, maybe once in a month or twice in a month. Ideally, every time your hair is washed, even your comb or brush should be washed. So, working on these basic lines itself has helped multiple of my clients reverse their hair fall within a month's time.
So, what nutritional deficiencies most commonly show up as hair fall?
Yeah, I think iron, then B12, and calcium D3. These four, someone might not have them all. For someone, maybe iron alone is causing hair fall. For someone, the hemoglobin and iron is okay, but D3 levels are massively low. So, working on that helps to arrest hair fall. For some, the levels might be completely normal, but still hair fall is there. So, over there, understanding normal food, what is going wrong, working on that, working on external regime is what helps.
So, what like simple, common daily food habits support hair
Good
health?
hair. Yeah. So I think starting your day with a glass of warm water, because warm water supports gut. Okay. So as I see, maximum clients make one common error. They have water in the morning, but by and large, it's room temperature. Okay, so instead of having room temperature water, first having a glass of warm water, and ideally adding a pinch of salt and squeezing lemon helps to activate your entire system, which also gives you the right amount of stamina and energy during the day. Along with that, having two overnight soaked almonds, it gets your gut started off. Ideally, the next thing that helps hair fall is you having your breakfast within 30 to 45 minutes of your wake up time. Again, this is a big error which most people overlook. Maximum clients, especially women, they neglect their breakfast, pushing it as ahead by 2 to 3 hours when I consult them, mentioning that when we do things for kids or family, we are not eating, we don't get time. Now, a message I would like to give everyone, who's facing this is, and when I ask them, When your kids go to school, do they eat and go? The answer is yes. My question is, why can't you eat alongside them? So, as a mother of two young kids, I think I do this. It's not just preaching but practicing. All our entire family has breakfast within the first 30 minutes of waking up. So, when you push your meals, as I said, the acid level spikes, and that works in a detrimental manner for your hair fall. So any breakfast is fine, freshly prepared hot meals, but within 30 to 45 minutes of waking up. Next, incorporating any small mid meal. It could be a fruit, it could be some protein snack like steamed sprouts and a glass of chas. Then having your lunch. Lunch needs to be balanced with a small amount of fiber like raw salad, your roti, sabzi, dal, rice, whatever. And after 20 minutes, again, you can have a glass of thin chas. Evening, you can easily have a small snack, which I see a lot of people skip. So, realistically, you can have something like a khakra and chana or makhanas, protein based, or a fruit and a handful of peanuts. You can easily have your tea or coffee in the morning and evening and your dinner. So, dinner again can be any hot item. You can even have flexible options like a lot of good Jews I know have items like pav bhaji, dal dhokli. It's fine. But again, incorporating a raw salad and your cooked meal, this works perfectly and it will ensure zero hair fall. Even this simple template.
But does overconsumption of protein also impact hair growth or hair fall?
As I said, we neither overdo nor underdo. The key is to incorporate, like any meal that you have, one fourth portion needs to be protein. So if you are having, let's say, your normal food of one roti or two rotis, like a lot of people will have only roti sabzi. So instead of that, roti sabzi and a bowl of dal, or roti sabzi and 4 5 pieces of paneer. This helps, or roti sabzi and a bowl of curd. So one fourth portion of any protein can come in. What happens when you do this? Your body gets the tissues get the adequate protein to repair themselves, heal themselves, and you keep your body plus hair in a healthy manner.
Just to reverse my question now,
Yeah.
what should people stop immediately
Okay.
to have like better health, hair health?
I think not focusing overly on external products. Like a lot of people believe that doing more will lead to better results, but and this is not with nutrition. It is with regards to external care. Okay, so one thing people need to stop doing is prioritize external products over your internal health, which is nutrition. What I would say is people need to listen to their body, follow staple food templates, and stop overdoing on external care products, which will lead to better hair.
If I talk about hormonal issues over here,
Yeah.
so why are PCOS and thyroid so common today?
Coming back again, both of these are clubbed under the heading of lifestyle disorders. And when we look at lifestyle, again, the 4 5 aspects under the umbrella term of lifestyle come under it, which is your nutrition, exercise, emotions, mindset, and sleep. So I truly believe that if you work on these, a lot of times, as I see it, parents themselves are under equipped and under motivated to cook healthy meals for children. This is an unfortunate but a true fact. A lot of clients who come to me, they openly share that कंटाल आता है खाना बनाने का. So if you as a parent are bored, or if you are not motivated to cook basic healthy meals for your kids, the foundation itself from the school days is dodgy for children. So, when they grow up as pre-teens or teenagers, most youngsters and young girls today face PCOS and thyroid because nutrition is completely underbalanced. There is no regular moderate exercise that's there. As I see, a lot of youngsters today are sedentary. So, and you don't need to join a gym, you don't need to join Zumba or yoga to stay fit. You can just do 20 minutes of outdoor walking every day or even 4 days a week and eat balanced meals without relying on outside restaurant prepared meals. And trust me, the hormonal issues should go down. They will go down. And prioritize good sleep because, again, youngsters don't sleep till past midnight.
True. How many times a week or a month is food from restaurant or outside allowed?
Ideally, I would believe twice a month is the max limit that realistically one should try and incorporate, because what usually happens is no matter how good the restaurant might be, the oil and the spices are the major culprits when it comes to restaurant food. So you might eat 7 days at home, but realistically, if you eat outside food on the eighth day, literally, it's as equivalent to pouring water on the efforts of the 7 days that you have taken.
Is it
Yes,
because of the oil they use or the ingredients? What?
both oil as well as the spices, that is the masala that goes into the food, both are equally to be blamed. Yeah.
So, Snehal, why are prenatal and postnatal care are still widely misunderstood or like
Yes.
under-supported?
I truly think that in India, although prenatal and postnatal care is developing, I'll not say it's completely underdeveloped, but while prenatal care is still in a good way that's available to women, postnatal care is highly focused on the baby. Okay, so during pregnancy as well, I feel women are expected, and there is a pressure on women to do it all. Okay, what people do not realize is the body undergoes massive hormonal shifts, massive emotional upheaval when a woman is undergoing her journey of pregnancy and even postpartum. There is nutrient depletion that happens because during pregnancy, it's the growing fetus and the baby that take in most of the nutrition that the woman is consuming, and postpartum as well. When the mother is lactating, maximum nutrition goes to the baby. And there is sleep deprivation. A lot of women, even during pregnancy, face sleep deprivation because the growing belly makes it uncomfortable for them to sleep comfortably throughout the night. Now, as I see it, why it's misunderstood is because there is lack of empathy and sensitivity. And again, to make this happen, the beliefs and the conditioning plus exposure is something that needs to undergo a shift. Also, I don't know, but there is a gender bias where the like today, I truly believe that Gen Z or the millennial fathers are doing way more to support partners and kids during the pregnancy and postpartum journey. But earlier, as it was seen, like the husband or the father had very little to do, with the postpartum or even the pregnancy phase of it. So I think what we need to understand that it's a shared journey of both partners. Okay. And when it comes to the woman itself, she needs sustained care and not just care for that particular period, because it takes nearly 2 years for a woman's body to completely bounce back to normal after a delivery. I would again say it's not about making radical amendments, but making sure that the woman has adequate nutrition, she has adequate family support to ensure rest, because rest is underrated. And if a woman rests, she's made to feel guilty during pregnancy or postpartum. There is also an anxiety in a lot of women to bounce back, to join work, to be financially independent. Again, over here, why it's misunderstood is because the family doesn't give the woman that adequate backing that you can do it all with our support. So even if she does, there is always an uncertainty of whether she's doing it all or failing at something. And this is where I think a sustainable, continuous care covering aspects like nutrition, rest, movement for the mother, that is exercise, need to be taken care by other family members around her and relieve her of emotions like guilt and anxiety.
So how can mothers care for themselves without like guilt, even when the support, as you said, is very limited?
Very good question, and I'm glad you asked it because here I can share my own example. As I said, I have two children. My first child was obviously planned, and because it's the first child, everyone is super enthusiastic to do a lot. Now, when it came to my second pregnancy, to be very honest, it was accidental. But nonetheless, we decided to go ahead with it, and it was my decision as a woman because my husband gave me full backing and support that since it's your body and you have to take it through, I will not force you to take the decision. And with a lot of pondering, it was my inner call that I want to take this forward. I'm the only child. My mother is the only child. Even my husband is the only child. So we had zero knowledge or zero confidence as to how do I balance two kids at a time. But because I decided and I was firm on taking this forward, as I already mentioned in the previous part, I had no family members actively staying with me. My parents are 10 minutes away, my in laws are not there. And when I decided I wanted to have a second child, during my entire pregnancy, as I've spoken about holistic modality, what I first did was rewire my mind. Okay, instead of strategizing things externally about what infrastructure I need or what people do I need to hire, I first fixed my mind firmly on the fact that I will be a great mother to both my kids. And in that phase, I am not going to neglect myself either. Okay, so what I did was I did a lot of research. I read a lot of articles in terms of how women can manage two children without family support and not neglecting their own needs in the process. It was a gradual thing. I think we all evolve in the journey of motherhood because motherhood truly forces you to reevaluate your priorities and choices in terms of how you want to show up. So, I did not rely on any external agency to help me. I had a basic framework of initially a cook and a house help who would come and do all the things and go. Gradually, I think I started getting a hang of it in terms of taking out 20 minutes for my own postpartum exercise. I think I was not into any skincare or hair care routine at that time because survival mode was more important. So it started off with one thing at a time, which is 20 minutes of postpartum exercise as a non negotiable and working on the optimal nutrition. After a year, I think I started taking out another 20 minutes in a day for my own care, like maybe twice a week for my hair care or skin care while prioritizing other things. So I feel it's not difficult. It is about re-evaluating your priorities and deciding, making a choice that as a mother, I am not going to neglect my own choices because what we need to remember is our children are also observing us. So if we do for them, but we neglect ourselves in the process, the message we are giving them is it's okay to keep pouring from an empty cup. So, no, it's not okay. And again, I think this realization happens when you do. Like I don't think I got to this point from the beginning. There are a lot of days where I see myself that I pour from an empty cup, but then I truly get convinced that if this continues beyond a point, it's not sustainable. So, again, as we spoke, it's not about starting, stopping, and halting, realizing, picking up where you left from, and again coming back to that particular choice point.
So, how should women uh, look after like nourishment, rest, and probably movement after childbirth?
I think if you are a mother who can't move out realistically, like if you are someone, if you don't have family backup support where you need to be present at home for your kids and balance other things, the easiest thing I believe one can do is there are amazing YouTube video tutorials that are available, and you can start off with 15 minutes of those special postpartum exercises, because you can't do all exercises post delivery. Also, it depends on what mode of delivery you have had, whether it was a normal or a c-section delivery. The approach is different for both aspects. Walk is something you can easily get started off when we are looking at movement. So one can start with 10 to 15 minutes of walking. Maybe after completing the first 40 days of postpartum at home, mothers can start taking an outdoor walk for 10 to 15 minutes every day so that they get fresh air. There's always a good feel when you look at nature, or you feel the breeze on your face or on your body. Till those 40 days, nutrition is what needs to be prioritized at home, and rest. So do not feel guilty if you are not prioritizing your movement during the first 40 days, because during those days the body is at its worst vulnerable. So while the baby is resting, you can rest, or uh, any time during the day you can hire a part-time babysitter, or call some family member to come for 1 2 hours and get your rest. You can, like, these days I think cooks are easily available. So when it comes to postpartum nourishment, I believe that's a non-negotiable. But again, working on simple things without complicating nutrition a lot. So even if you have your staple nourished foods, ghee I think plays a very important factor, but not overdoing, because eating hot, freshly prepared, moist meals with good fat helps a lot for postpartum recovery. But again, you need to be careful of how much ghee you are having, because a lot of times unknowingly people overdo and gain a lot of weight. Yeah.
So, does even ghee help with weight loss?
Technically, it directly will not help in your weight loss, but what happens? I'll just explain. So, ghee comes under the category of fat as a macronutrient, okay? And it's a good fat, because again, when we look at cholesterol, there's HDL and LDL, and ghee definitely comes under good cholesterol category. Depends also on what type of ghee you are having and what amount you are having. So, ideally, 1 to 2 tablespoons of ghee everyone can include in their daily diet. And it helps because it strengthens your joints, it works on your hair health, skin health. So, if you are on a calorie deficit diet and if you're having ghee, the ghee is going to support your body to ensure there is no compromise of other aspects like energy, stamina, hair fall, dull skin during that process. Because I truly believe it's not just about weight loss, it's healthy fat loss with other healthy markers as well. If you lose weight, but there is a compromise on your blood markers, there's compromise on your hair, there's compromise on your skin, your immunity is compromised, then certainly it's not a sustainable weight loss.
True.
Yeah.
Very true. So, what role should yoga play in a holistic wellness journey?
I think yoga, the way people are consuming it today, they think that only yoga can be their savior for anything and everything. Okay. But The whole point is if you're someone who does yoga regularly, but everything else, that is your sleep, your stress, your diet, your lifestyle, is against it, then even if you do yoga, you will still cringe and complain that I'm not seeing the results as I expect them to be. Okay. So, yoga, the meaning of the word yoga itself means union of body and mind. Okay. But the way yoga is taught, the way yoga is being consumed is only about attainment of some immediate physical goal. So I either do yoga for my weight loss, I either do yoga for inch loss, I either do yoga to get my hormones in control, which is yoga for diabetes, yoga for PCOS. But really, if we look at yoga, it was Patanjali who started off, okay? And he has spoken about 8 limbs of yoga. That is Ashtanga Marga. So there is Yama, Niyama, then there is Asana, Pranayam, Pratyahar, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. The ultimate aim of yoga is to unite your body with your mind. But how many times do we realize this when we are doing yoga? I don't think even a minute. So people equate yoga with complex poses, complex asanas, posting pictures in active wear, doing headstand. And while I'm not against it, but I just feel that you are diluting the entire purpose of what yoga is for. So, to give you a very simple example, even if you are doing some simple physical act while doing yoga, as raising your hand, okay? But while raising your hand, you are mentally aware of how my hand is getting raised. In the process, how my spine is helping me, and even for example breathing or pranayam, I might do it for 5 counts, breathing through my right, exhaling or breathing out from my left, but each breath in, my mind is here, I'm aware. This is what makes yoga truly successful. And trust me, you need only 15 minutes every day to do yoga in this manner, which will show up during the other 23 hours of your day. So I truly believe this is how yoga needs to transform. And it's, while again, I'm not against aspects like power yoga or vinyasa yoga, but diluting them to the level of just exercises is certainly not right.
So, what happens when yoga is practiced as a way of living
Yeah.
rather than just an activity?
I truly think that the first benefit that comes about is you start being aware of every moment. You start being aware of every choice you are making, and it comes from a place of mature and grounded emotions instead of coming from a place of impulse or reaction. The other aspect, the other benefits I also feel are your entire nervous system remains in control. It also helps to keep your hormones in an excellent health. So, a lot of times where people face hormonal issues, if they do yoga in this manner correctly, literally and without any exaggeration, within a month, there is a massive improvement in terms of their hormonal conditions.
Okay, so
Yes,
how
yes.
how does that help?
So I'll share a case study of one of my old clients who had PCOS, and I had helped her with designing the right nutrition plan and yoga. While she used to not get her monthly cycle for as long as 8 months. But when we started with the regime, she followed, like, although formally she was there under me for a month, but she herself followed it through for the next 2 3 months. By the end of second month, her cycle started coming. Like, she first got her cycle on the 16th day of we starting the regime after a gap of 8 months. And third month, her cycle regulated to 28 30 days clockwork. So this is where we see that how hormones re-establish themselves, because yoga is truly about aligning your mind and body together in a way that grounds your nervous system and endocrine system together. So yoga done through therapy, like integrative therapy based approach, instead of doing it in a generalized hasty manner.
So, how should beginners approach yoga?
I truly believe that for beginners, doing three Omkar chants and even the warm ups that yoga prescribes is still enough and a game changer if done on a regular basis. Beginners needn't try to do the complicated asanas or even other exercises. For you don't need to do yoga for 1 hour. You can just do it for 15 minutes. I truly believe consistency is the key. To give a very simple analogy, you do not brush on one day for 1 hour and then skip brushing for other 3 days, right? A simple activity done for 1 minute, but when done every day, keeps your teeth healthy and clean. Same is with exercise. If you do it for 1 hour on first day and then don't do it for other 2 3 days, and then again come and do 1 hour, instead of that, why don't you do 15 minutes on a daily basis or 15 minutes for even 3 days a week? So for beginners, even simple omkar chants, warm ups, and light breathing exercises for 1 to 2 minutes can also help.
Correct.
Yes,
Even Yogruti
right.
is all about this. Can you
Yes.
just talk us through what exactly Yogruti does?
Thank you. So I started Yoga Vritti in 2020, immediately post COVID. And during that juncture, I actually first just did a certification in yoga and I started teaching yoga alone. No doubt it took off well, but after a point, after 6 months, 1 year, I reached a realization that yoga alone, as I said, is not a savior. Okay, what people require is an entire lifestyle that can be sustainably designed and cultivated, even when other things like stress, daily routines, or hectic schedule continue to work in the background. So, yog vritti, the word yoga means union, while vritti means behavior. What it literally translates into is what you do for an hour on the mat, how can you extend it for the remaining 23 hours during your day? Yoga is not just about the exercise or movement, it is about what you eat, how you eat, what you think, okay? Then how your emotions are and what your mindset is. Even home environment plays a lot of role in terms of impacting a person's wellness. So, when we look at Yog Vritti, I believe in a holistic framework where when I talk to clients, I try and explain them that how making changes in every aspect of body, mind and emotion will cumulatively help the client to see results from root instead of seeing results at a symptomatic level.
So, post starting Yogruti, how did, see, expanding it from nutrition to lifestyle, how
Right.
did it change your and your clients' relationship with wellness?
I think how it changed the perspective is normally everyone looks at wellness from a compartmentalized perspective. Or, people compartmentalize wellness, that wellness for me is maybe just movement, or wellness for me is just eating right. But the point that I try to drive back with every client is you do not need an extreme or a radical system to make this happen. Okay? It is about understanding your life. And as a coach, how can I help you to design your life in a manner that supports you in an all round manner? So the programs technically they focus on nutrition. There is also movement and there is mindset and emotional grounding. So when all the three are worked upon, the results are genuinely at an all round level and not from any one compartment or from a one distinct path. So this is how I think the approach changed, because even I realized that an all-round approach is required for any client to see results. Clients also understand this because a lot of them believe that only nutrition can fix us or only yoga can fix us. In reality, it is always a combination and a cumulative change of these micro habits that are going to help you.
Very true.
Yeah.
So if someone feels stuck, okay,
Yes.
so what's the one place that they can start today?
I think anything that resonates with you. So I truly believe if you feel stuck, the first simple thing you need to do is ask yourself, where am I stuck? And is the stop, or the stoppage or the halt that I'm experiencing, is it there outside of me or is it actually there inside me? So while we blame external situations or environments a lot of times, I truly believe the actual reason we can't move forward is because of our own inhibition. So I think a a realistic one step forward for anyone who is feeling stuck is start writing. Okay, writing even for 2 minutes or 3 minutes will help you to first understand, evaluate. You can even scale yourself. Like whichever area you're feeling stuck, you can ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I right now? And with gratitude, instead of begrudging that area or where you're feeling stuck, offer gratitude, because you are at least getting a perspective to acknowledge that you are stuck and move forward. And then with that gratitude, set a second goal. Where do you want to see yourself at a scale of 1 to 10 6 months from now? And then also think of what aligned actions I can take, maybe even starting off 5% or 10% on a daily basis. So this will help you to actually move forward without the idea being in your mind and you blaming that I am feeling stuck but unable to move forward.
That's a very valid point you have made. At least like it helps you set things forward.
Yes,
It helps you with your it changes your mindset as well
true.
going forward. Yeah. So one last question I have.
Yeah.
So to your listeners, what one thing would you like them to remember when they think about their health going forward?
I believe the power is in your hands. So you have the magic and the power to create anything, including your own health. And start with making micro changes. So, for example, if I want to run a 21-kilometer marathon, I can't, and I have never exercised. I can't run for 1 hour. I'll become sore. So, start with 5 minutes or even 2 minutes. Next day, add 2 minutes more. So, if you want to improve your health, it's in your hands, and start by making micro changes instead of big ones and then getting deflated about it.
So that's all for the listeners to remember. Yes.
Yes,
Yes, but thank you, Snehal. It was a lovely conversation,
likewise.
very insightful, and
Thank you.
lot of listeners are going to learn a lot from this. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah,
This is great having you.
likewise. Thank you. Thank you so much.